And so they found me, and they went into a lot of details to oh, I good job. But I'll get them.
What size are you?
Hello. Hi, Counselor. Thanks for having me.
So what happens when you get into
Hi, Counselor Green.
is there absolutely so it's not really about and people so that's the weakness. So I was like, this makes so much sense. This makes so much sense, right? It's exactly. It was a great article, but I was like, this is hard.
People are catching on. It's not random that it's because we know it.
Because you know it.
I mean, I will. If anybody's going to they were like, oh, that makes my sense. It makes sense. But you know, they said, I don't think and they're like, yeah, everybody, honestly, we have heard this so many times. You're not something and
Good morning, and welcome to the Arts and Economy Committee. I always say Economic Development Committee, but it's Arts and Economy Committee. Good morning. My name's Dan Ryan. I'm the co-chair of this committee, along with Councilor Green. And welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started with the traditional roll. We have Rebecca in the clerk's box. Hey, Rebecca.
Good morning. Dunphy.
Here.
Smith. Clark. Green.
Here.
Ryan.
Here. I do know that both are coming. That would be Councilor Smith and Councilor Clark, one a little bit sooner than the other, but just know that they're on their way. And we will go ahead and do some introductions. But before that, why don't we do the meeting rules? Christopher, are you going to read those? Okay.
Welcome to the meeting of the Arts and Economy Committee. To testify before this committee in person or virtually, you must sign up in advance on the committee agenda at www.portland.gov/council/agenda/arts-and-economy-committee, or by calling 311. Information on engaging with the committee can be found at this link. Registration for virtual testimony closes 1 hour prior to the meeting. In-person testifiers must sign up before the agenda item is heard. If public testimony will be taken on an item, individuals may testify for 3 minutes unless the chair states otherwise. Your microphone will be muted when your time is over. The chair preserves order. Disruptive conduct such as shouting, refusing to conclude your testimony when your time is up, or interrupting others' testimony or committee deliberations will not be allowed. If you cause a disruption, a warning will be given. Further disruption will result in ejection from the meeting. Anyone who fails to leave once ejected is subject to arrest for trespass. Additionally, the committee may take a short recess and reconvene virtually. Your testimony should address the matter being considered. When testifying, state your name for the record. If you are a lobbyist, identify the organization you represent. Virtual testifiers should unmute themselves when the clerk calls your name. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christopher. And we will be doing testimony later in the meeting. We wanted to make sure we jump into the report. That's the main event. Before we get started, Co-Chair Green, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, thank you, Co-Chair Ryan. I'm a pleasure to have the honor to co-chair this committee, Arts and Economy. I think it's a really important nexus for all the business that we do in this city. All of the other policy work, if I may say, depends upon whether or not we have a healthy economic engine in our city. And so, the burden is high, no pressure, but, proud to get to work on this.
Thank you, Councilor Green, or Co-Chair Green. I'm just going to go ahead and frame a couple of words before we start on our report. But why I'm looking out there, Shabri on her way? Shabri, it's you. Oh, good morning, Shay. I had Shabri in my notes, but I'm glad you're here. Okay, I won't worry about that. First of all, I'm just really happy to begin our time together as a committee listening to our market's most thorough and objective data-driven report on our current state of the economy. I believe taking in this report as a committee at our first meeting gives us a level set as we build our work. Before we listen to the report, keep in mind we are building a committee that includes our employers, our investors, our builders from an ecosystem that also includes those industries that activate our streets. There are many. They activate our streets, our buildings, our parks, and downtown and in our neighborhoods. As such, arts is a prominent part of this committee, hence the name. Music, sport, hospitality, the recreation side of parks. Simply put, when our city is activated with such activity, revenue comes in from this joyful activation, and Portlanders are generally much happier. When people visit our city, from the ride on their Macs to their destination, and in each outing over their stay, they have a positive experience. That was the Portland story for many decades. And unfortunately, that turned prior to the pandemic. The decades it took to build that reputation that other cities, trust me, other cities envied it, took a nosedive. And now we are humbly building it back. I will end with a brief story. Welcome, Councilor Smith. I will end with a brief story. On February 14th, we experienced the winter storm. It started on the 13th, I'm sure you all recall. Because it was the final weekend of the Winter Light Festival, I was determined to get to it. So my spouse and I, unfortunately, were late to a gathering that included some other elected officials, and we just couldn't find them. So simply put, we decided to have a wonderful date night. I mean, it is Valentine's Day, and it really was amazing. You had snow and ice surrounding the arch, so it made the art actually more lovely, and it was just exciting. But what also was exciting is there were still people out on the streets, but it wasn't really necessarily Portlanders. What I noticed is our hotels were buzzing. We had tourists in town. I heard accents. I heard languages from definitely Asian countries. And I'm kind of a curious person, so I went up and tried to talk to them. And sure enough, there were people here from Japan, from Korea. And man, it made me feel so good. And they were all having a great experience. I talked to somebody that was here from San Francisco, and they said point blank, I wasn't sure about coming to Portland, but this is magical. That was their words. My point is, we have more weekends like the Winter Light Festival when people come to visit and have positive experiences. That reputation is going to come back, but we must be steadfast and we can never let up. So with that, I just wanted to say that I'm delighted that we're going to have this report now. And Shay, you're going to come up for Prosper Portland to get us started on receiving the State of Economy report. Take it away, Shay, and I know you'll be introducing people from the Chamber and of course from Eco Northwest. Take it away, it's yours.
Good morning, buenos dias. For the record,
on this, we will now and then we'll be playing timekeeper.
Okay.
But for the most part, just let it rip.
Thank you. Well, good morning all. For the record, my name is Shay Flaherty-Patin. For the next few months, I'll be serving as interim executive director at Prosper Portland. And I apologize, Counselor, you're not hearing from the brilliant Shabri Vickers today. She's unfortunately out ill. So you're stuck with me and the B team. I'm pleased to be here today, though, to share and be with our partners to introduce the discussion around the State of the Economy report. As I prepare to turn it over to Andrew Hone and the rest of the Value of Jobs Coalition, I want to share a few thoughts. The information we're hearing today is sobering, to say the least. These trends are alarming and they're actionable. Though in an era where all of us are working around the clock to gain any traction that we can around reputational repair, I have to say I'm disappointed by the way the media has latched on to the surface level urban doom loop aspects of this report. But the report itself is much more nuanced and the data are very, very real. We see the impacts of population decline and lower replacement rates from outmigration in this week's news around the county's budget. And we know that new Portlanders are also coming here at pre-pandemic levels, still choosing our city, and we should be proud of that. Ultimately, though, the report reinforces the calls to action that we know from Advanced Portland. We need economic development tools and market-based interventions to retain and grow jobs and to spur housing construction that supports all Portlanders. On that, I agree. And as the report notes, we've faced many significant challenges over the past few years and have made and are making significant progress. I'm certain you reviewed the report and you understand how critical it is for us to coordinate and act in concert with our partners in the private and nonprofit sectors to serve Portlanders by achieving the goals that we've set out in Advanced Portland. Inclusive growth for our city can only occur when we understand that we are inexorably linked in our pursuit of economic well-being for our city and our region. Collaboration is at the center of that work, and it felt pertinent to mention a few projects that our city is currently partnering on that showcase how critical partnership can yield results. So just a few things. This spring, we're launching a new Office of Small Business, which builds on our existing work to support local entrepreneurs, small businesses throughout the city. I think I saw Better Portland in the audience. Shout out to Stephen. Over the next 18 months in construction will happen on the new streets for Broadway corridor, and that's going to provide new critically needed infrastructure, construction jobs, and the development of 2 residential projects that are bringing 450 units of affordable and middle income housing. Just this Friday, we're going to participate in a groundbreaking event for the Williams and Russell project. That team prepares to commence work on a historic development project delivering 20 missing middle homeownership units, 85 affordable units, and a 30,000 square foot black business hub that uses cross-laminated timber. Recent investments that our board has made for $20 million in Old Town and property acquisition in Gateway that have made by our lending team are going to support more than 250 units of middle income housing. And we continue to collaborate with partners like Albino Vision Trust and OMSI on their respective visions for new and restorative neighborhoods. As a city, we just celebrated the opening of the Flock Food Hall. We at Prosper invested $3 million to increase downtown vitality and provide spaces for community to gather. Our events and film team, working with Downtown Clean and Safe and the Metro Chamber, noted that in the 2024 holiday season, attendance was up at all of the 8 large major central city events that we tracked. As well as with partners at Pioneer Courthouse Square. We are now focusing on more than 100 upcoming spring and summer events. Some other good news, Jaguar Land Rover is going to invest $180 million on automotive tech here in Portland, which is great news for the city and is due in partnership, in no small part due to the partnership with our business advancement team. And I'll note that after more than 18 months of work with the council, with staff, community members, partners at PHB, we have now launched 6 new TIF districts that enable us to advance our work, support residents, local businesses, and ensure that the city continues to be a place where inclusive economic growth is at the forefront of our priority. Now, as much as the conversation and focus, we're going to turn now to our partners to talk about our economic competitiveness. There is an inherent requirement to build on this recent momentum that's been generated by these projects, and we have many more that are led by public, private, and nonprofit partners. Through Advanced Portland, we at the city, we have a strategy, and through our shared commitment to Portland, I think we have an opportunity. If we aren't the ones betting on Portland right now, who is going to be betting on Portland? So thank you, and with that, I'm introducing our great partners at PMC. I'm handing it over to Andrew Hone, President and CEO of the Portland Metro Chamber and the Alliance, as well as our partners at Echo Northwest.
Want to take the
Welcome, Andrew, and your team, and the
Thank
team
you.
from Eco Northwest.
I'll just make some brief introductions, but first, for the record, Andrew Hone, proud registered lobbyist with the Portland Business Alliance and Portland Metro Chamber. Thank you to co-chairs Green and Ryan and to this committee. It's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. This is also my first time testifying in the newly renovated chambers, and I think it's a great symbol of what our city can and should be. So thank you for convening this. I'll give you a little bit of context so we can understand why we're here today and the report that we're presenting. So for well over a decade, the Alliance has contributed what is generally considered the definitive guide to the region's economy. It's called the State of the Economy, and along with the state of the Central City and downtown, it is a obviously much anticipated annual evaluation that gains significant media and policy attention. This goes back to 2009, and our staff have worked with trusted partners at Echo Northwest to produce the reports and challenge our economists typically to find and evaluate specific policy questions that support general policy conversations in the region. And just give you a little bit of sense of where we've come from over the past few years. East County's economy, housing affordability, the cost of living, the tax incidence, and the per capita revenue and expenses of our comparator peer cities, just to give you a sense of the things that we've traditionally done. This year's special evaluation, if you can call it that, is not really a focus on any sort of new area of evaluation, but instead it dives deeper into the connection between the economy and tax revenues to both the city, county, and of course, recent released, the state revenue. Specifically also to the Central City and downtown, this is the third annual State of the Central City and downtown. We know that since the pandemic, the challenges to central cities across the world and nation came into focus following the new era of hybrid work, and we've consistently worked with Echo Northwest to add this special insert. In the past, some of these reports have been so good as to not be able to find fault in the economic data. In the past few years, it's been a little bit more challenging to find the bright spots. And I just want to point out, these are all made possible purely by the contributions of members, private sector, and businesses that come together to fund these studies. It's important to understand something significant in this report. I want to really give the time and floor to our economists, but I think it's the most important takeaway, if you will, about the information you'll hear. It doesn't matter whether you are an economist or you're an armchair economist or you play an economist on TV, like me, or you're someone that just dabbles in public policy. There has been an axiom that everybody generally holds true and dear in our state and our region, and that is, as the United States economy grows, because of who we are, we grow faster. And as the United States shrinks in terms of economic terms, we tend to shrink faster. The news in this report delivers that that is no longer the case. That as the US economy continues to grow, we do not. I don't share that because anyone should celebrate that information. This is as much a reflection on the private sector as anyone else. And we want the economy to grow and expand and to deliver equity and sustainability to our community. What I think the call to action is to build on, actually, Councilor Green, you said this perfectly at the beginning. We're in this together. This committee could not be more perfectly timed. Its creation and inception has purpose now that you should all feel empower your work. Because of the challenges we are facing, this committee's import has never been more critical, and yet at the same time, it is just newly formed. Working with our partners at Prosper Portland, I can just promise you this report should empower and encourage you in urgency to execute on good economic strategy. With that, thrilled to introduce, or let themselves introduce themselves, this incredible team of economists from Echo Northwest. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Mr. Hone.
Chair Green, Chair Ryan, members of the committee, thank you for having us here. For the record, my name is Lorelei Gentinen. I'm the president of Echo Northwest.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Brittany Bajent, also with Echo Northwest.
Good morning. Mike Wilkerson, also of Echo Northwest.
Just getting our tech going here. Okay. I am very grateful to have the opportunity to spend some time with you this morning and do a reprise of the presentation that Mike gave. last week at an event that PMC hosted that has generated some pretty spectacular headlines. You heard Shay referencing those. And I actually want to start there with the concept of the urban doom loop, because as Shay noted, if you fail to read the articles and listen to the data and information, you really miss a lot of very, very important nuance. So since those articles have hit the airwaves, I've had about 100 different people ask me some flavor or other of two questions. The first is, what is an urban doom loop? And the second is, are we in one? So let's just hit those right up front. An urban doom loop is a concept in academia and in the literature that starts at the top with reduced demand, whether that's in the form of reduced jobs, reduced population, et cetera, that results in falling revenue, whether that's tax revenue or private sector revenue, that then results in reduced investment in the urban environment, which then circles back up again to further reinforce reduced demand. Once you're in an urban doom loop, and we can see examples of cities that have been in those in the past, it becomes very, very difficult to get out of one. And unfortunately, we are seeing some very early warning signs that we need to pay attention to. We've got the key challenges that we'll be going through in the sort of meat of this presentation here. Decline in population, and given what's happening with the relationship between births and deaths, and expectation that we are going to need to compete harder for migration. Near last in job growth, and seeing losses in some sectors that are really critically important to our economy. And then structural changes in the way people are working, that's going to continue to affect our central city. So you put all of those pieces together, and then you look at what's happening with city budgets, county budgets, and you start to see the beginnings of some pretty concerning signs. That second question, are we in an urban doom loop? I personally think is completely the wrong question. If we're even talking about this, the conversation should be, what do we do to get as far away from that pattern as possible? And luckily, the literature gives us some things that we can hang our hat on there as well. You go back up to the top of that doom loop with the fundamental components that contribute to demand, and you start there, while you continue to make the investments in the urban environment that are so necessary to keep a vibrant, functional, sustainable economy that really does share prosperity across the entire income band. So what the literature calls us to do is to recognize that growth is not a given, that we're in a situation where we need to be competing for jobs, and we need to be thinking about how we keep people here, and that we need to think about how we align our economic development priorities across all of the different levels of government and all of the public and private sector. So there's my nuance for y'all. I think the context really matters. As you heard from Andrew, we've been doing this report for a while, and they used to be boring. We didn't get called in to talk to council. We didn't make spectacular headlines with our findings. And that's because the economy was humming along, and that really we were in a situation where we were both growing the pie and having really productive conversations about how to share that pie. Between 2010 and 2018, we jumped from 40th to 17th in median household income. And in that same time period, we had a 45% increase in GDP. We were trailing only San Jose, San Francisco, Seattle, Austin, and Boulder. Then what happened? Then we moved into the pandemic, and you heard a little bit of that narrative from Andrew earlier. A lot of what happened during the pandemic was not unique to Portland, but we have trailed a lot of our peer cities in our recovery and are continuing to feel some of the lasting impacts of that. At the same time, especially over the course of the last year, we've had a lot of really fantastic wins that are very much pointing us in the right direction. I'm personally very excited about the WNBA coming to Portland. Our airport is incredible. I weirdly look forward to going to it now when I have to travel. We've seen some really exciting developments that are moving forward. The James Beard Market is an example that I think is really worth celebrating, because we deserve the spotlight for being a global center for food. And people are noticing it. The headlines are shifting. We're seeing a lot of kind of positive stories coming out in Portland, and that those accolades are very much deserved. And it's even trickling through into some of the survey data. This is a recent survey from DHM that's looking at the negative perception of quality of life, and it's getting closer to pre-pandemic levels. Not probably where we want it to be, but signs of improvement. However, some of those fundamental aspects of demand continue to show troubling signs, and nobody wants to invite a skunk to their picnic, so thank you for inviting us here nonetheless. Despite all of those wonderful positive wins, we do have some news to share with you that deserves the attention of this committee going forward. And I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Brittany. Literally hand it over.
Thank you, Lorelei. All right, so I will unpack this first challenge and then move on to Mike. So this first challenge of the Portland region has lost population might be a simple thing to say, but there's a lot of nuance and dynamics to it. So we did want to spend a little bit of time with this first challenge with you. So the first is important to recognize that we aren't just looking at what's happening here locally and regionally. We don't want to look at data in a vacuum. We want to compare ourselves to some peers around the country. So as a part of this report, every 5 or 6 years or so, we do select a new cohort of peers, and we selected this group last year. This is our second year evaluating ourselves in comparison to these peers. So they include Denver, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, and Sacramento. And we always include Seattle. We will never be Seattle. We are a very different city than Seattle, but some of the Pacific Northwest dynamics are important to consider. So this first indicator of population decline is important because one of the reasons why we selected this peer cohort last year was that all of the cities, or for the most part the cities, peaked in population around 2016, 2017, and started to decline prior to the pandemic, a similar pattern to what we saw here locally. What's different now is that with our peers, that decline has reversed, whereas Portland's has not. So we are different from our peers in that way. However, all are losing population to domestic migration, which we'll get into in a little bit more detail. This is not felt throughout our region, so to further unpack this, we wanted to look at what was happening with population change in each of our counties. And Multnomah County is seeing the largest decline in population, largely due to that net domestic migration, so people moving out of Multnomah County to other parts of the country. We're seeing pretty stagnant change in Clackamas County, a little bit of decline in Washington County, but not nearly the decline we're seeing in Multnomah County. And compare that with the growth we're seeing in Clark County. So their growth, they're seeing growth in natural increase, which is births over deaths, people moving from outside of the area, and international migration as well. Now, our city is declining in population, and that's not atypical to cities around the country. So we're borrowing this research from the Brookings Institution, and in 2020, 2021, so the map on the left is showing cities that were declining in population. This was in the heat of the pandemic, and folks were choosing to live outside of cities, and we were starting to have those conversations around, are cities dead? Is our cities ever going to come back? And just a couple of years later, we're seeing that they are. And from 56 cities to 31 cities, declining in population, a lot of these cities are starting to increase in population. That is not the case in Portland. So this is looking at that data in a bit more detail. We're seeing how remote work was changing this dynamic and what's been happening here locally. And we're showing this to, if you look at the graph on the left, that peak of 56 cities in decline from just a couple of years ago, and that's starting to normalize and come back to those years prior to the pandemic. The other side of a population equation is that births over deaths number, and we call that natural change, and we've experienced and benefited from natural growth for decades. This is showing the last 25 years or so, and up until a few years ago, we could count on 10 to upwards of 15,000 more people born in our community than dying. And that number is quickly declining. So we still have net positive of more births than deaths, but that number is quickly approaching zero. And again, that's not atypical to Portland. This is a lot of information in some tiny font, but what's important is the direction of those arrows. And so this is looking at the largest 50 cities around the country and showing their natural change. And our country is aging, our fertility rates are lower. So all of these cities are starting to approach this dotted line, which is a 0% line. And as soon as you, as a city, cross into that negative space, that means you have more deaths than births in your community. And you can see some of the cities at the bottom, Pittsburgh, Tampa, Cleveland, and so forth, are already in that space. They already have more deaths than births. And Portland is about halfway, 2/3 of the way down on this list. It's highlighted in orange. And we are still positive, but what is different about Portland is that our rate of change is faster. So we are inching toward that 0% line faster than our peers. Now, historically, as a country, and here locally, we have relied on international migration as well. And in the 2010s, we had about 45% of our US population growth was from immigration. And in the 2020s and projected forward, expecting 75% of our population growth due to international migration. Now, we don't know how that will perhaps be different with a new federal administration, but we would expect some adjustments there. So when we think about people moving to our country and moving around our country, we often talk about them as voting with their feet. And this is a really interesting phenomenon that's been happening since really the beginning of time. But people are, when they're relocating within our country, are often choosing to vote for a community. They're voting for maybe not a candidate, but for a community where they want to live. There might be better housing options, more employment opportunities, better services. And so when we see people starting to move in and out of these communities, we can consider them as voting with their feet. And we share this because this is happening around the country. And as you're seeing, our entire country is aging and fertility rates are dropping. We are all competing for these people to move to our community. We are all wanting to be that place where people want to vote with their feet. And back to some of the earlier framing remarks, we do still have people moving to our community, and that is something to acknowledge and to celebrate. So the bars here are showing the number of people moving into Multnomah County compared to moving out. So for the past several years, we've had around 30,000 people moving into the county every year. So that actually hasn't changed. But what has changed are the number of people moving out. So the darker shade is showing the number of people moving out, and that number has been increasing. And this final piece about migration and population is around the household dynamics, the income dynamics of the people moving in and out of these communities. And so this chart is showing each of our 4 counties in our region and the people who are staying in those counties, the people who are moving out in red, and the people who are moving in green. And focusing in on Multnomah County for a moment, so the upper left quadrant, we can see that the red and green lines are very similar. The income dynamics of people moving in and out of the county were very similar up until about 2019. But over the past few years, we've seen that number start to diverge. And so we're seeing households with higher incomes moving out of the county and individuals with lower incomes moving in, upwards of about $30,000 different in income. And in aggregate, that has equated to about $1 billion in income lost in each of the last 2 years within our county. We're seeing a similar dynamic in Washington County. So you can see that red line is a bit above the green line. So households earning more are leaving Washington County versus moving in. But those colors are reversed in Clackamas and Clark County. And so households with more income are moving into those communities. So with that, we'll move on to our second challenge.
I want to be mindful that we're sharing a lot of data here, and we have a couple other sections. So if there are kind of pertinent questions around some of the data we've shared, happy to pause and take some questions. Otherwise, we can jump into the next sections and hopefully reserve time for questions at the end.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mike. We do have 25 minutes for questions at the end, and we have you going for another 17, 18 minutes to be exact. Cool. All right.
Thank you, Chair Ryan.
Colleagues, if there's something urgent, please jump in.
I had a real quick question. Very quickly with regard to population change, I know that it was specific to the fewer babies versus aging population. Do we know which is the case that's throwing off that number? I know that we are, facing the we don't call it the gray tsunami anymore, but we have an aging population. The boomers are retiring, which means that also a number of boomers are dying, and we also know that younger people are not having kids at the level that they were. Which of those factors is influencing that number more?
Yeah, I mean, in Portland specifically, it's actually both. We have a higher share of populations over 65, and our fertility rates are lower than, say, national averages. So we kind of have both sides of that equation, unfortunately, at play.
Thank you.
All right, so let's jump in to the job challenges. And I think Andrew teed this up. When we've looked at historically over many business cycles, the Portland regional economy in economic expansions grows faster than the US, and in periods of economic contraction is more impacted. And at the end of last year, we saw an early warning sign that, hey, this is different. Oftentimes data is revised. You can see here there are two different sources of data. There's the national BLS data. The Oregon Employment Department maintains their own. Over time, they do converge, but in the short run, sometimes revisions happen. And so we said, okay, this is interesting. This is different. Several months of data don't make a trend, so let's continue to monitor that. And so this year, we monitored this every single month, and what we saw was, depending on the data source, either a reduction in jobs or a slight increase in jobs, either way, well below the US growth average. So as I mentioned, we tracked this every single month, and we looked at where the Portland Metro ranks within the top 50 metros, and it hovered between the 48th, so second worst, and the 42nd, and in the last month of data and end of year, it was ranked 45th. And so that, again, tells a more, I think, consistent story around lagging in the job growth across the top 50 metros. And I think importantly, when we look across sectors, we again see this is consistent across sectors. And for us, when we look at kind of leading indicators around traded sector activity and local sector activity, we tend to look at construction and leisure and hospitality as important indicators. Construction around the local sector expansion, certainly population growth, et cetera. Leisure and hospitality, the ability to attract outside dollars from region. And unfortunately, those have consistently ranked dead last amongst those 50. When we look at individual sector growth over year, what you see, I think, is private and education health services with a large expansion. We look at that as more of a one-time adjustment than something that's expected to persist. Some of that was around expansions related to SHS. Some of that was a full-time staffing from temporary positions in pandemic that weren't able to be filled. I think increasingly we see government here as a challenge going forward as we see federal employment numbers dropping quickly and unknown as how much they will continue to drop in the future. When we look at all of the traded sector, they are all, unfortunately, in decline at the regional level, and this is using the Oregon Employment Department data. If we use the federal data, the picture is unfortunately even more bleak. The sectors that are highlighted in blue are predominantly office-centric sectors, so professional and business services, financial activities, and information. And if we look at that in aggregate, that's about 7,000 jobs in the last 12 months that have been lost. And if you look at average space utilization today in an office environment, that could be somewhere in the neighborhoods of 1 million square feet of less demand, which is the effectiveness of an entire Big Pink emptying in 1 year. And so when we get into Central City and what's going on, I think understanding that the overall level of demand for activity is dropping. Brittany started to unpack the population changes by county. I think worth noting certainly is that the state has recovered from pre-pandemic. Clackamas County and Washington County are closely mirroring the state's performance. What we see, though, is the divergence between Multnomah County and Clark County being stark. Multnomah County still has not recovered the jobs lost, down something like 18 to 20,000 jobs, lost jobs in this last year, where Clark County continues to grow. And so what we started to understand was this regional divergence is atypical. We wanted to understand the extent to which it is atypical within a region to have two vastly different performances economically. And so to do that, we looked at all of the 220 counties in the top 50 metros, and we went back to pre-pandemic and said, how much have those changed? Multnomah County was in the 6th percentile, so near the bottom for population change, and in the 4th percentile for employment change, whereas Clark County was in the 75th percentile, 76th percentile for population change, and 82nd. That gap, we don't really find any other metros with significant gaps of that size. They are much more homogeneous within region. That also persists across industries, where you can see, again, differences, but the main takeaways are at that aggregate level of population and industry level. What I think we wanted to start to understand is from an economic development strategy, and Shay mentioned Advance Portland around kind of inclusive growth, is what is the structure of our economy? Lorelei mentioned we had amongst the fastest growth in GDP per capita, trailing effectively Silicon Valley, Austin, Boulder, and part of that reason is we are uniquely positioned with high value add manufacturing as our largest employer in the state. And when you start to look at which sector is contributing most to GDP, again, we are very unique in that computer and electronics manufacturing is our highest contributor to GDP. You look at other states, and that's often construction, professional business services, et cetera. And why that specifically matters is, A, it's important because that has contributed to our growth, but the counter side to that is our reliance on that sector is very high. And within that sector, one firm, Intel, is more than 70% of the jobs in that one firm. And so when Intel is doing well, that's a great benefit to the state and to the region. And when Intel is not, we are more susceptible to those changes in the business cycle than, say, Colorado with professional business services, many firms amongst there, California, Minnesota, et cetera. There are many more firms within that sector that are not as concentrated as one firm is. And so from a strategy standpoint, that's suggestive of diversification across industries as being important, small and business, large business both. The third challenge is a changed central city. And so here we have mentioned the kind of sequence of events around negative feedback loops and the consequence of what that looks like. And I think the key here, again, as Lorelei mentioned, is acting with urgency. Oftentimes, data is lagged. And so we don't fully grasp what is happening in that moment in time. But what we have seen now is several years of consistent trend around reduced demand. We know that urban revenues are falling. Unfortunately, you are faced with budget deficits that are projected to sustain or increase into the future. And that's that negative consequence of that loop and requiring urgency. There are some unique circumstances to Portland. Certainly, Portland is not the only central city to be adjusting to the new normal coming out of the pandemic. What I would say we have are some unique headwinds and tailwinds. A headwind we have here is our small block size, the smallest of any urban city. When the economy was thriving, this was a massive benefit to our region. When the economy isn't doing as well, what we have is much more vacant ground floor space. And when we start to think about how that contributes to an active environment, that is certainly a challenge. Our densities aren't as high as other places, and so our relative mix of retail to vertical use is amongst the lowest of any metro area. A tailwind that we had that is now rapidly eroding is our property tax regime is disconnected from real market values much more so than any other place. And so we have been largely insulated up until probably now, and now we are going to fully absorb any additional changes to valuation going into the future. So for us, we're looking at ideally leading indicators. The vacancy rate is a very lagged indicator. Leases are signed. They're typically for a 7 to 10 year duration. And so if we want to understand what's happening in the moment, really it's the leasing activity. And here we do see what I would say is a positive trend. Leasing activity is up from what it was a year ago. That is good. However, it is still significantly reduced from where it was in the pre-pandemic time, potentially 30% lower than where we have seen. Because of that, the vacancy rate continues to increase. The other indicator, and I think this is the most important one, is looking at foot traffic. In foot traffic, we can get very specific within our central city, within our 10 sub-districts, and we have done that in previous work in Advance Portland and other work with Prosper Portland. to understand the component parts of foot traffic. We have employee-driven activity, we have resident-driven activity, and we have visitor-driven activity. And I think here the key is we have seen a slowing of that recovery. If we look back in 2023, 8 million new foot traffic trips were in our central city in that year. In 2024, it was only 3 million. And so on a percentage basis, we have gone from a 10% increase to about a 3% increase. And again, this is not unique to Portland, but this is suggestive of whatever bump we were getting coming out of the pandemic is eroding, and now the hard work begins. One of the key takeaways is remote work was probably the key contributor to a reduction in foot traffic. And so here, what we're looking at is the change within our 10 sub-districts of end of year 2024 compared to December 2019. And you can see it's varied. Some of our better performing districts are down less than 10%, and certainly our downtown is our most impacted area. The question, I think, is how important is return to work? So that is to say office foot traffic in terms of getting back to our recovery. And the answer is it's a part, but certainly return to office back to levels that we saw pre-pandemic does not take us out of the current circumstance. You can look at downtown, we'd still be down 25%. And what this suggests is visitor foot traffic and adding a mix of uses around residential is the key to getting back to that thriving central city that we all desire. In terms of where and foot traffic is coming from, out of region visitors pre-pandemic were about 20% of all trips. That's more than 50 miles. That's the same today. And so we haven't seen a change in the mix. It's just an overall decrease in the level of visitor activity. If we look within a neighborhood level, what we see is really within our central east side is the largest contributor to the decrease in activity. Yes, some of our more suburban neighborhoods and areas are down, but on an overall nominal basis, they are less important. And what I would say is a sign also of good news is if we look at the long legacy of investments in public transportation and transit-oriented development within those max corridors, you can see some of those areas are in yellow, which is an actual increase in visitor foot traffic in those transit-adjacent corridors as evidence, again, of some positive news within the region. The fiscal element here, I think you're all intimately familiar with. The challenge I think we face today is property taxes are roughly 50% of general fund. And we look at historically, they have grown at about 4% per year in terms of assessed value. The latest forecast from the city economist has them growing at about 2.5%. The reason for that is several. One, decrease in new construction is expected to persist, and new construction contributes. Compression, which we're not going to take a lot of time going into, occurs more as real market values drop, and then there are also some collection issues that are anticipated. And so overall, that's about a 9% decrease in property tax over the next several years is what's being forecast. And for the benefit of the public, we're not going to go into a deep dive on how property tax systems work to save our mental sanity, but just as a quick refresher, our property tax system is very unique and, as I mentioned, disconnected from a real market sense. And so what we have is the maximum assessed value is what grows every year at 3%. And typically the assessed value equals the maximum assessed value because the gap between the real market value and the maximum assessed value is positive. And so what that means is in any given year, the real market value is largely irrelevant because you get the full 3%. When we have a precipitous drop in real market value, that is when we can actually see on an individual parcel basis a decline in assessed value, and that has happened almost never in recent history since measures 5 and 50 have. So this is a relatively new phenomenon. Compression has happened. Here we can look at the top 20 largest valued office buildings in the city, and what we have seen is that cushion that once existed has been eroded. And so now any additional reductions in real market value will be more or less fully absorbed. And we've been seeing consistently a 25 to 30% reduction in value in office from the assessor every year. And because they're a year lagged, that is likely to continue for at least another year. And that's why I think we're seeing that reduction anticipated at 2.5% growth versus 4% growth going forward. The other side is new construction. Every year we can see between $5 and $8 million of new assessed value comes on the rolls. And so if we just, for example, look at the last 5-year period that comes on the rolls and it grows, that's about $40 million of value. And so we start to think about what is new construction likely to look like going forward. It's going to be at a decreased level. And so new construction activity, again, is an important contributor to the overall fiscal health. So putting it all together, I think, is what is the general stance on terms of what we do about this? And I think the challenge is surveys of the general public continue to identify the same areas of concern that we've seen for the last 3 years, despite meaningful improvements on many of those indicators. When we look at growth in jobs, they're near the bottom. I think for us, this is one of those causes for concern, is understanding the sequence of events is through a reduction in jobs and growth, and that the general public is not necessarily tracking that as their areas of highest urgency. And I think a lot of that goes back to the legacy of Governor McCall around please visit but don't stay. And we can look at other recent examples around, I would say, an ambivalence or skepticism towards growth. And so when Intel has negotiated a number of SIP agreements to invest strategically in the state in exchange for property tax exemptions, there's been concern at the county level, at the state level, around not being that interested in major expansions. And specifically a quote from the previous director of state economic development, now Business Oregon. A few years ago, Oregon was really interested in all the jobs we could get, but the political environment has changed. People know there's more than one side to growth. And I think, again, today, that's a very different circumstance than we were facing in 1999, but again, points to kind of some of those long-term skepticisms. The challenge, I think, for the region is how do we grow? And typically the answer is we attract outside capital to invest in our region. And one of the measures that we have that we think is a best proxy to understand how attractive is this region is a survey that ULI does every year around ranking the top 81 markets. And in 2017, Portland was number 3. And when you're number 3, you're typically going to drop. We saw that dropped into the 20s range. And then I think with the news cycle and change in circumstance in Portland, we dropped into the 50s. And what we expected to see was in this last year, because we have seen market improvement and surveys show that, we expected this number to go up. And we were very surprised to see Portland drop from the mid-50s to 80th out of 81, trailing only Hartford. As an example, ULI does emerging trends presentations across all of their markets. I presented on a panel in Denver a month ago, and Denver dropped from 20th to 35th. And for them, that was a 5-alarm fire. They're very concerned about Denver's overall prospects. And one of the comments was, well, at least we're not Portland. And I think for us, this is probably to me the most concerning of all the slides, which is relying entirely on our own economy to grow itself versus attracting outside dollars is a very different circumstance. And this is suggestive of a lot of work in terms of reputational damage. I think we all understand this to be unwarranted and not reflective of what we see and feel, but this is to me a major, major headwind. Housing, again, is an important component of this. This is looking at statewide permitting. The recently released ONA production target for the state has us now at 29,000 units per year as that target. The current trend, if annualized, would put us at about 14,000 units, so well below that trend. I think importantly, what this is showing a decrease in multifamily, not in single family. If you look at the city of Portland, in the last year, we had less than 900 units of multifamily permitted, the least we have seen in well over a decade. So much so that if we look at the rest of Oregon, removing the city of Portland, the rest of the state is performing roughly like we would see nationally or tracking the state of Washington, which is to say the macro market conditions that changed in 2022 and 2023 led to the decline, and the rest of the state mirrors that pattern. It's really Portland as being more atypical, and I think that ULI sentiment is one of those contributing factors around why we see much less permanent activity in the city. What that unfortunately means is the units under construction in the pipeline are dropping. And historically, when that happens, vacancy rates will decrease, and when vacancy rates decrease, rents will go up. And That is one of the challenges. The second is we already see construction jobs on the decline. As there's fewer construction activity, that is going to continue to decrease. And certainly from a property tax standpoint, we saw new construction as an important contributor. So for us, we look at the permits versus under construction and anticipate this will only continue to decline over the next 12 months. From an affordability standpoint, I think the region has always been attractive because we've had relative affordability. That has eroded certainly over the last decade. But if we go back to 2019, we can see the median family income at the time was around $90,000. Mortgage rates were much lower at 4%. I think always has been a challenge of families earning the median income. It's a struggle to earn 20% as a down payment. That is pretty unattainable, and by some estimates can be 10 plus years of savings. So acknowledging that 20% down payment is a challenge. Even with that, there were still pockets of affordability within our region. Again, this is in 2019. If we look today, median incomes have gone up, so have interest rates, so much so that you have almost no areas of affordability for a family earning the median income of about $117,000, and again, with that assumption of a 20% down payment. And so when we look at shared prosperity, understanding that attaining homeownership is more difficult today than it's ever been, we also want to look at how the economy, having meaningfully transformed in the last decade, has been shared. And for us, one of those ways to do that is to look at the entirety of the income distribution. So this is on the left, the lowest earning households, 50 is the median earning household, and on the far right is the highest earning household. And what we're doing here is comparing it to the US average as a reference point. And so what we saw in 2012 was our lowest earning households earned more, in the range of 15% more than the national average, and that is because our minimum wage has always been slightly higher, and we'll see going forward how that was a big step up. What I think is an important distinction here is this is not to say low-income households have been thriving. Our low-income households, if you look at in the 30th percentile, 90% of those households are cost burdened. At the median income for renter households, still more than 50% of those households are cost burdened. But this is, again, just to look at changes over time. And what we can see is, as our minimum wage increased, we saw big benefits at the high end. And as we got out to the 80th percentile, our highest income households were earning below the US, but we've seen, again, gains across all incomes. What was new in this report was looking at how the pandemic has changed this long-term trajectory. And what we saw is it's largely impacted the lowest earning households. And that is cause for concern in terms of what growing the economy looks like. I think the key here is growing the pie should also be a priority, not just understanding the distributional impacts. And as an example, we can look at the Seattle Metro, and certainly we've talked about them as not being a peer for us, but you can look across the entirety of the income distribution as being much higher, much more so even than any cost of adjustment living would factor in. Last 2 points, I think Metro always has an outside contribution to the state. We've known this. We have disproportionately more employment. Our GDP is higher. What this most recent study looked at was its contribution to the fiscal revenue at the state, also as being outsized. And I think that's an important consideration when we look at how important is this region to the state's economy, and the answer is it's a contributor outsized. And the last one, I think, is a question we get frequently, which is, do we still need to build more housing if our population isn't growing? And I think all of us here aren't trying to state that we believe that the population won't grow. This is a hypothetical exercise to understand what is the state of housing today. We are short 15,000 units, and demographic change alone will take the average size per household from 2.39 to 2.25. So effectively, with the same population, we would need 6% more housing units over this next 20 years. And the one thing that economists can actually predict accurately is demographic change. That's a near certainty. No amount of in-migration can change the demographic trend. So we know that this is likely to be the case, and suggestive, again, that we need to build a lot of housing going forward, even absent growing population. So I will turn it back over to Lorelei for concluding comments.
Last slide here, and I think we've hit on most of these points as we've been going through the presentation. Obviously, Portland has been on a real upward trajectory over the course of the last year, and there's a lot of hard work that's gone into that we should all be proud of. This data makes it clear that maintaining that trajectory is going to require some more hard work and a deeper look at some of the fundamental underlying components of our economy to make sure that we really are growing in a way that can allow all of our residents to thrive. So we need to think about bold action. We need to recognize that we are in a competitive position. We need to make sure that we are in a competitive position. We need to think about what it looks like to diversify our economy and what it looks like to think about how our small businesses and our neighborhood businesses can thrive along with the larger scale traded sector industries. And we need to recognize that these are not issues that will resolve without bold action. Passive responses are not going to get us where we need to go. The visual that you're seeing there on the right is an example of the opposite of an urban doom loop, a sort of positive feedback loop, and is the direction that I think we all need to be moving toward. So we'll pause and let you all cover us with questions.
Eco Northwest team, thank you so much. And colleagues, thank you for your patience. I know that there's questions. We'll probably go till almost 11. We'll have a hard stop just before 11 to go to public testimony and the rest of the agenda. So please hang out for at least 30 minutes as we ask questions. Okay, the floor is yours, colleagues. Who would like to go first? Councilor Smith.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Thank you all for coming to give us this very sobering report. What is it that we can do from our policy level to help impact this loop of doom?
I almost want to bring Shay up to help with this as a representative of your economic development agency. Advance Portland is very much headed in the right direction, and continuing to make those kinds of investments that support business growth is going to be really critical. There's several marquee developments in the in the downtown and Central City area that, if they move forward successfully, will put Portland on the map in a new way. So I'm thinking specifically about the Albina Vision Trust and the post office blocks. Those kind of opportunities can really drive change and help to continue the positive perception trend that we have been on.
Thank you, Lorelei. Yes, Councilor, I would agree. Investing in the catalytic projects that we know send market signals are crucial, right? OMSI, Albina Vision Trust, certainly Broadway Corridor. Supporting all those initiatives are crucial, and we know we're in a moment of budget uncertainty and budget harm, right? We know that both the county and the city are in this moment. We also know that as a council and as a city, we've stepped up and we've approved new districts, 6 new TIF districts, which will invest in the downtown and in East Portland, but those resources won't come forward or to fruition for another 5 years. So we at Prosper Portland have been working closely with the Office of Government Relations for a pretty aggressive legislative agenda at the state. We think the state needs to invest in some of these initiatives, particularly if we want a better use of housing, a better mix of uses in terms of housing and small business and activation in the central city. I think supporting those, continuing to see the wins. We saw headlines in the article from Bloomberg around how entrepreneurs of color are driving a resurgence, right? So continuing to invest in business technical assistance and support for small businesses, I think that type of vibrancy is crucial, supporting buy local. All of these factors work together, and Advance Portland calls on us to, yes, let's grow and retain jobs. Let's grow and support our employers. We have a business advancement team at Prosper Portland. All of these services, I'd say, are helpful, but we truly don't have a lot of economic incentive tools to, say, attract a headquarters, right? Like we have TIF. Those TIF resources won't come to scale for a few years. The only other tool that we have at our disposal these days is the enterprise zone. That's a 5-year tax abatement for new incentives for, basically we abate improvements on capital improvements. 5 years of that is waived, and then it comes back under the tax rolls. We are, in cases of business retention and expansion, competing with a lot of other states that have more resources. So that's why we've focused on state advocacy quite a bit.
Thank you. And it sounds like to me that you're depending on construction development to pull us out of this this lull that we're in right now. And I think that we can't just focus on development. One of the key things that you said at the end of the presentation was that our lower income communities they're just as affected and impacted, and I don't hear any ways in which we're going to try to get some of those folks out. I'm the commissioner for District 1, which is at 82nd and east to 162nd, and it goes from to the north, Marine Drive, all the way out past Foster Road. And so for me, what I'm looking for, I know that the average income in my district is $60,000 compared to the $90,000 in the other 3 districts. And so I'm going to be looking at opportunities to build a workforce. You had a little slide about talent development. I want to make sure that we're using our resources to develop talent, to not only go into career pathways of construction and those kinds of things. I want to make sure that those folks have an opportunity to have a career pathway in the city of Portland, because currently we have about 855 vacant FTEs. How do we get those filled? How do we get those filled with underserved folks, with folks who live east of 82nd? And if the issue is access to capital, access to technical assistance and those kinds of things, I'd like you all to bring them forward. I know you're starting a new small business department, but if those small business departments are not going to give folks access to capital, what are we doing?
Thank you, Councilor. I'll offer that, not a lot of folks know that we at Prosper Portland also have loans available. We have a thriving small business loan. We often make those loans available and these days more competitive certainly than the market. And I think that's right. We have seen quite a decrease in SBA lending in our region. I think it's cratered, and that's a big issue. Providing resources to entrepreneurs around everything from credit worthiness, all of those types of resources, we know those disparities exist. I think everything you shared is crucial. I do think this committee might want to consider inviting our partners at Work Systems, Inc. to come forward at some point. I think many of you all are aware the city's general fund resources that go towards workforce development go towards them as the as the regional workforce development body for our region. I will share, I have been hopeful at some of their recent reports beyond construction and the usual pipeline supports we see for apprentices and those types of projects and CDL drivers. Certainly, I've been promised by seeing promise from their pilot of getting folks into semiconductor jobs. I think I've recently.
Yes, I spoke at a graduation last week for PCC with that semiconductor program that they have, but that's not also good enough because we need to push them into higher income jobs. Those are still semiconductor jobs, but they're not the 100,000, 150,000 that was promised in the baby chips bill at the state legislature, that new jobs would come on board. And so in the next couple of weeks, as you talk about having bold ideas, in the next couple of weeks, I'll be releasing a few very bold ideas to increasing our workforce, increasing the number of diversity in our system. And I will be talking to you, but I want to make sure that we're on the right track. And after listening to this report, I know now more than ever the policies that I am going to recommend going forward are going to be much needed. And we're going to be talking to Andrew McGough in the Labor and Workforce Committee too. So thank you.
Councilor Green.
Thank you for those comments, Councilor. And thank you so much for the presentation out here. I just want to start by thanking both Shay and Lorelei. Is it Lorelei or Lorelei?
Lorelei.
Thank you. Thank you to you both for starting the conversation off by pushing back on the media narrative around what was extracted from this presentation. It was very doom and gloom. Sort of deterministic and fatalistic narrative around this urban doom loop. We're not there yet, is my view, and we don't want to reinforce perceptions that could bring us there. And the way I see it is that this is just a basic Keynesian dynamic. It's a post-Keynesian dynamic, to be precise. And so you can find yourselves in an equilibrium that's below full employment, and that's hazardous. And that means, and to your point in the slide deck, that means we have to do something about it. We can't just sit back and wait for the ship to right itself. So I really support that framing. I think the presentation as a whole does a really great job of laying out the landscape and the points of urgency. And, my takeaway from it broadly is that we've got to do everything that we can through this committee, through our other committees, whether it's labor and workforce, whether it's housing and homelessness, to accelerate the rate of housing production in this city. That to me, I see, I think it's the cost of living relative to the incomes that we have in this region that is driving this this population loss. Is my takeaway from all this. So I just want to applaud the presentation and the work here. I do have a few questions, maybe comments really, but I'm not going to let you off easy. If you go to slide 9 and 10 in the presentation.
I'll reshare. Just give me 1 second.
Okay.
Okay, hang on.
And cut me off, Counselor, at any point if I'm going too far.
If you ask for it.
Okay.
999, where are you? This guy. Is that the one?
Yes, thank you. So this chart, I think it does a pretty good job at comparing net population change and its contributing factors across different regions. And it does so because it's in terms of percentage of population. I will note that the Portland metro area, by my eyes, we've reversed our net outflow trend. So when we talk about we're losing population as a whole, I see it here, at least in this metro MSA presentation, as we've actually recovered. And 2 points doesn't make a trend necessarily. Maybe you want 3 or 4, but that to me I see is a good thing, and that's driven by migration, international migration. I think that's going to be really important as we think about our general policy approach. Do we want to make this a welcoming place for people to migrate to? Trump administration notwithstanding, of course. But if you go to the next slide, it's not presented in percentage terms. It's presented in sort of what must just be numbers, right? And I just want to flag for folks following, Multnomah County is the largest of these 4 counties on the slide, and so I think it could present a misleading picture about an overwhelming leakage from Multnomah. That's a Multnomah County that is not in proportion of those other counties. And as you said in the broader presentation, all cities are losing population in pure regions. So I just kind of wanted to flag that there's a difference here in axes. I think that if you go to slide 18, and some folks have heard me talk about this, but I would urge caution on using this IRS tax migration data, depending upon the stories that you want to tell. There's no question that it shows you whether you're gaining or losing adjusted gross income in terms of tax dollars from a region, no question. But what you can't get from that data set is the distribution of income that's part of that, right? And as you guys know, what you got is a total adjusted gross income for incomers and outgoers, and then you've got a number of tax filers, and then you can get a proxy for average. And I'll just note that, with the income distributions that we see in our cities and regions, you can have an outlier effect that draws that out. And so you can, present a biased picture here. And I had my staff take a look at some sort of the underlying, where are people going, right? Let's disaggregate this a little bit. And so if you look at, and I don't have this to share, but I encourage you to go back and take a look at this. From 2019 to 2020, people leaving Multnomah County going to Skamania County, you have like an adjusted gross income on average of like $100,000, and it goes up to like $500,000. And then it comes back a year later. And that's 61 people leaving the county. And that's really sensitive to one rich guy effect, okay? And so I basically say, I'm not like a data truther here. What I am saying though is that if we are telling it from the standpoint of marginal taxes are driving people out, that's really not supported by this data. But what is supported by this data, and this data tells the story broadly, is that there are issues in our city that make it difficult to live. There are livability issues, there are cost of living issues. And when you come here, you're earlier in your career, you're younger, your incomes grow, and then when it's time to start a family and buy that house, you can't afford to do it. And so where do you go? You go to Clark County, Washington, you go to Clackamas, and so on and so forth. And so that convergence that we've seen later in the slides from 2019 to 2023, that affordability convergence, that's that effect. And so that's my read on this. I'm probably using too much space. I think the last thing I'll say here is that when we think about the diversification, I really like the urge and the call for us to say we need to diversify our economic recovery. I would caution us to avoid the sort of beggar thy neighbor hunt for large corporate investment, because that's a race to the bottom in terms of tax revenues. So if we're trying to incentivize a Fortune 500 firm to come here, well, then Washington will meet us on that, and then California meet us on that, and so on and so forth. And what we've done is we've all lost a little bit there. And so I really like the model, and what I've heard from constituents is like, let's make it cheaper to live here. Let's make it easier to activate our spaces. Let's make it easier for artisans to kind of do what we did in the 90s and 2000s when a lot of people started moving here. So I'll yield, but I really appreciate the presentation and the good thinking that you folks are doing there. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Green. We have roughly 17 more minutes in this area on this topic, and so I'll give you 1 minute to reply to the statements just made, if anyone would like to.
I'll just kick off super quick so I can let my colleagues speak. I'll just make a plug, Counselor, for Advanced Portland. I think that we know the dynamics of kind of more traditional business development versus what we know as modern economic development. And Advanced Portland calls on us to really not just grow our own, but think about our competitive advantages and where we're good, where we have great human capital and kind of a strong workforce. So our focus is going to be on those industry clusters where we have homegrown heroes that can continue to grow. We had, I think, an overly focused approach, from 2009 for that decade around attraction. And we saw how that backfired, right? When some of those firms that we landed specifically in the tech area left us during the pandemic. So I think we understand that dynamic well, and our focus is on what are we good at? What can we celebrate? How do we grow employers here, and how do we help them stay? Because those jobs are resilient.
Thanks, Shay. 30 seconds from anyone in Eco Northwest.
Yeah, I would just say we did a report, I think 2 years ago now, looking at the importance of small business in this region, and we're amongst the highest share of places with small business of any metro, and certainly of all of our peers. And so again, just understanding the components of growth here has got to be balanced.
Thank you. Okay, Councilor Duffy.
Thank you. I couldn't help but notice an interesting dynamic within this, and specifically there was a slide where you'd call that with the polling of folks what the top issues are: homelessness, affordability, drug use, topping the charts, and how those are impacting people's relationship to the city. But those are actually a symptom of our previous growth, right? I bought one of the last sub $200,000 houses in 2015. It was in the Lentz neighborhood. At the time, it was on the wrong side of 82nd Avenue, so they didn't even offer anything other than dial-up. 6 years later, in 2021, my house was valued at $400,000. This is a small 3-bedroom ranch. That house is not worth $400,000. People don't fall into homelessness from Irvington and Laurelhurst. They fall into homelessness from Lentz when the housing prices in 6 years double. That is a symptom of our broader, the problems of how we had enormous amount of success in growing. The Portlandia effect was real. But that was not felt equally. And today we are looking at a situation in my district where, with Councilor Smith, we represent East Portland. There are not enough jobs in East Portland to support the economy. That's part of the reason we have so many traffic deaths, is we have too many people trying to leave East Portland and trying to not able to get onto the failed piece of infrastructure that is I-84 to go to work, and people are driving poorly. Homelessness and affordability are economic problems, and we've not done a good job of focusing on that. And when we focus on recruiting the top level, we're not focusing on what those look like at the bottom. I think that also a lot of our systems have become self-inflicted wounds. The way that we do liability insurance in this city, and the fact that liability insurers are pulling out of the city, partially because of the way that we report our own data. And making buildings unaffordable. And of course, we have the enormous questions about the role of the federal government coming. And as you're saying, the Albina Vision Trust is a beautiful idea, but it is so dependent on an enormous amount of money coming from the federal government, who is increasingly showing this hostility towards Portland and a hostility towards spending money. I think that the missing component of this is the relationship that folks have to each other. Our relationship to the office space downtown has permanently changed. We can try and bring as many people back to downtown as possible, but if people don't have a reason to come downtown, they're not going to. And the last time government said anything to anybody about their neighbors was COVID, and we said your neighbors might be sick, stay away, but we've never actually invited folks back in. I think we need to lean hard onto the things that create that community and that relationship between individuals who want to be here. People want to be in Portland. But if we don't give them a reason to come downtown, they're not going to. And trapping people in an office so that we spend an extra $8 at Subway is not economic development. I want to lean into those positive reasons that people want to come here and spend money and pay for hotel rooms and car rentals and go out to dinner. I'm really excited. I don't care what the thing is, and I hope that the economic development, as we are looking at ways to spur economic activity, it's not just recruiting firms, but it is leaning into those opportunities for community to develop. I personally was a musician, so I talk about the music industry a lot, but I don't care what it is. If it gets people out of their houses and into the streets and into business districts and into small businesses, I'm all about that. But we have to be really thinking about this. I think that we are making the mistake that the growth we saw during the Portlandia era is the projection, and I think that's the aberration. We have to come back to some sort of baseline and understand what is the new relationship to these vacant spaces downtown. What is the market incentive to tenant some of these vacant spaces, both commercial and residential? And additionally, I think we need to have a bigger conversation about taxation. I'm a good liberal. I want to spend tax money. I want to take people's money and spend it, but we got to know what we're getting for it. And right now, people are not seeing the benefits of what we're actually spending on those tax dollars. And so I think we need to have some big conversations about the future of Portland and who we are as a city and what our identity is. That's a little ranty, so that's about all I have to say right now. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dunphy. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for being late. I apologize to my colleagues. I had a medical appointment that I could not let go. You have to wait a long time for those. And I did read the material in the last couple of evenings, and I really appreciate the report. I just want to make a couple of comments and echo some of the comments that my colleagues have made. These themes are not new. It's the adaptation, our strategies that have to adapt and are new, and I appreciate that. I want to really echo the affordability, the housing issue. That's a key issue for me, and I know we'll discuss later some of our visions for where this committee goes, but that's definitely an issue for me. I just want to say that last night I made an appearance before 80 different people at a meeting, and people are looking for that optimism. They are looking for hope. They echoed some of these themes that we have actually talked about: affordability, particularly for their children, jobs for their children. And I'll speak more to that later, but I appreciate the moving away from the doom loop, that we really have so many exciting things on the horizon for this community, exciting projects, but the fundamentals we really need to get at, and that's the affordability of our community. And I would just echo what Councillor Dunphy said too, is that people are looking for how to engage. Not just downtown, but in their neighborhood. How do we engage? How do we get together with our other neighbors and build that sense of community and livability? I know it's not necessarily an economic development issue, but it's related. So, and I'll make more comments later when we get to the visioning part of this. But thank you so much. I appreciated the report.
Oh, thank you, Councillor Clark. Mike, I think I'd like you to bring up the slide that looks at the same issues are top of mind.
I'm sorry, say that again?
The survey results one.
Oh, survey.
The ones that, it lists things such as cost of living, affordable housing, drug use addiction. I don't have the number. Yeah, that's it. My colleagues, I don't love the term doom loop. Who does? But I was struck by a comment that you made in Denver. Is it Denver? And they're at what number?
35th.
And they mentioned just don't be like Portland, right? And what I was also hearing is the urgency of the Denver community to accept what they were seeing, And what are we going to do? I think your comment earlier was, what do we do to get as far away as possible from such a label as doom loop? And I think all of us up here are optimistic about doing that. I also have to caution us not to dismiss, in my opinion, the data that we're seeing. And in my almost 4.5 years in service, I think one of the challenges is for the elected officials at the county, at the city, at Metro, at the state, to all get on the same page and accept what the challenge is and what the problem is. And I do think there's a political thing going on where we want to deny information. I don't like it on either extreme, be honest with you, but I think that it's something that needs to be discussed and just put out there. I find this information to be not surprising because I've been looking at it for the past few years, but I do believe we're at a place where we're being more honest about what's so. And I just had to put some voice into that in this meeting. And it may be uncomfortable for some to hear, and I'm not being a pessimist. I'm a hometown, I was born in Portland in 1962. And to see something like K-12 education at 44%, that's not the Portland story. Many of us moved here because you could get a great public education. That was a driver. That's what employers would use to recruit somebody over another place. Employers would recruit someone to move here because of our livability. And when that was the case, we didn't see drug addiction at 52% as a concern. So my point is, we just have to accept that and then do something about it. And we've struggled to get on the same page to have this impact that would then be deeper if we all are paddling in the same direction. So tomorrow we meet with the county on the current state of homelessness in the city. And my question to you is, this seems to say there's a lot of interconnection between these livability issues and why people are leaving. And it seems like those who can, those who have more economic privilege, if you will, to move, are choosing to do that. But I just want to hear a little bit more about, are you overlaying, except beyond this slide, what are you seeing and what are you hearing underneath the data?
Should I go?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we started at the beginning, you can look at data, you can look at sentiment, and you see market improvement in the city on all issues of livability, homelessness, drug use, cleanliness, et cetera. And I think the firm that does the survey, DHM's perspective is a good one here, which is you ride the elevator on the way down and you take the stairs on the way up. And so I think this disconnect around, even though big moves have been made, how long does it take for the sentiment to kind of adapt? And I think the challenge here, particularly when you're thinking about a prioritization in a time of constraint, is like how much sentiment versus short run versus longer term trajectories are we really thinking about trading off? And is the fact that the survey is still showing those things are top of mind important? And the answer is yes. But I think the question is, can we do two things at once? Can we think about prioritizing the short run while investing in our long run? And that's the hard question.
And I appreciate that. I think the reason we have a new mayor who focused on, I would say, a big livability issue, which is unsheltered homelessness, that's a sentiment, I believe, that's worth getting behind because that's the perception. It was like around 2015 where I was at the Phil Knight and basketball tournament. I think it's during Thanksgiving week. And I never forget this conversation. It was a woman from Detroit. And to just hang out with the word Detroit for a second, something tells me, if you look at data back in the late 60s, there could be some similarities. I want to poke at that just a little bit. But I'll just say that they were really upset and they decided because I was from here, they just vented at me about the conditions they were experiencing. That tournament was, I think, in 2016. And it was really, they said they'll never come back here based on what they experienced and when they were walking around the streets of Portland. So my point is, I think we were living on our Portlandia laurels for a long time, and they kind of ended before the pandemic. And I don't think the political will has been there from the different entities to just accept this challenge. Let's do it. And so as an optimist, it's about what are we doing about this humanitarian crisis that won't continue to plague us 5 years from now. And so it's like all of these issues are interconnected, and the humanitarian crisis spills into, obviously, housing, it spills into public safety, it spills into the economic drivers that we need. So I think we sometimes have failed amongst our political bodies to just accept that fluid dialogue on how these are all interconnected. And we can't be afraid of that conversation, but yet embrace it. So I think this data gives us a chance to have that honest dialogue. It's not comfortable, but our job is to, we get paid to think and to have opinions and to do our best to read the room and move Portland forward. And so I'm really grateful that we started with at least all of us receiving the same information. We have different perceptions based on our life experiences. I lost a brother on the streets in the humanitarian crisis in 2014. I'm in recovery. I don't do denial. That's like a part of my ethos. And so, that's just where I'm at right now. But I also want to continue to be a cheerleader and continue to do all we can to get people to these activation events, which I do believe, Prosper, your focus over the last 2 or 3 years has been really helpful. I do think that the 5-alarm fire that they said that they didn't want to have, was that Denver too?
Mm-hmm.
Where?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think I'm having a little bit of Denver envy just because I wish we would have said that a few years ago and not just pretend that everything's just gonna, suddenly get better without aligned action. And so I think what you're pleading for us as elected officials, and that meeting tomorrow will be really important when we're with the county, is for us to really get aligned and how we are going to continue to move forward and make sure that we play our part. We have our side of the street is what we can influence. But influence perception and reputation is really difficult. You're right, it's like going up a stairway and then an elevator down. I never thought of that. What's that?
I think we're...
You're telling me I need to shut up. Okay, I'll do that. I just want to say that this was very important. I think that as we move forward with metrics and such, we'll try to work in partnership with a couple entities, and I think you'd be one that would be really helpful for us to do that. Thank you so much for being here this morning. I do need to move us along. Councilor Smith, do you have like a minute?
Yes.
Do we have 1 minute left?
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair. From 2010 to 2018, I sat on the Multnomah County Commission, and we were responsible for housing and homelessness. And I looked at the previous screen, and it said 65% of the perception is about homelessness. When I left in 2018, at the bottom of 2018, we had 2,700 unsheltered folks on the streets. Today, we have 5,700. We've gone up by 3,000. Do you think that if we were to eliminate the unsheltered housing on our streets and the perception of what people thought about how we look as a city, would that be enough to bring people back? Would that be enough to bring in traded sector businesses? And Shay, you can answer that question. Eco Northwest. Because for me, it's very disturbing that we're spending almost $420 million. I mean, at the time that I was on the council, we didn't have the Metro money. And now that we have the Metro money and we've increased by 3,000 people, and that's the number one on your graph, 65% people are concerned about homelessness. And so I'm just curious if we could project that image that we're actually tackling it and taking it down really quickly.
It's hard to speak in absolutes, but I do think all of those issues and everything we've discussed today does work in tandem with each other, right? All of these issues are interlinked. And over the pandemic, we at Prosper Portland, out of pure necessity, focused on a new program called the Repair Grant, right? We knew that small businesses, who are the core of vibrancy, often why people think of corridors and downtown as exciting. You're going to do your shopping, you're going to, Wildfang, you're going to the whiskey library, you're going to all these things. Businesses were experiencing, break-ins, they were experiencing livability issues. And so we had this program that got stood up, right? That was a market intervention in the moment. And so we have to acknowledge that all of these things work in concert. I don't know, and I can't say for certainty, if we ended unsheltered houselessness tomorrow, would it fix everything? There's all sorts of factors that play into this, right? Our competitiveness is a combination of our workforce, right? Of our human capital. Where are we? What are the sectors where we are thriving, right? Over the pandemic, we saw that athletic and outdoor employers continued to come to Portland, despite all these issues. And we know that many of the ones who are here today face those issues, especially if they're along transit corridors. So I think it would help. I think we're very grateful for the mayor's vision and his focus, but all of this is interconnected, Councilor.
I appreciate your comments, and I can tell you the people in District 1, they don't know nothing about the whiskey library. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
I just want to be very clear about the call to action here. It is not about ignoring the livability issues that were at the top of this list. It's about adding to that a sense of urgency around the things that are at the bottom of the list, because those are the fundamental drivers that will help us to move to a place where we can have a more equitable economy in the future and allow us to grow the pie. So that's the goal. It's not to move away from the important priorities at the top. It's to do a both and.
Thank you, Laura. I didn't see that at your data. I would like to end with this as I pass this to Co-Chair Green, is when you look at the comparisons to the suburbs, especially the Clark County, Multnomah County, and your comments made a lot of sense, Councilor Green. I'd like to see the data, if you have any historical about Detroit at that time in the late 60s, 70s, because my people that I know there, that's kind of what happened. It went to the suburbs pretty quickly and didn't return. So I think it's the micro data that compares us with other cities and other counties nearby is really fascinating. And we have more influence over that than any national trend, obviously. So thank you so much again for your time. We're going to pivot to another topic. I appreciate you being here. If you'd like to quietly leave, it's all good. Thanks so much.
Thank you. We'll loudly stay.
Of course you can stay. I just want to give them a chance to leave if you want to.
Thank you, Co-Chair Ryan, and thank you for the panel of presenters. We're going to move on to agenda. Actually, clerk, can the clerk please read the next item?
Yes, agenda item 2, economic recovery in Portland.
Thank you. So this is public comment, but I would like to start with an offer that we have a prompt when we do our public comment. And so my prompt to the commenters is, what does the economic recovery in Portland look like to you? And we'll take the first name, please.
Blake Shell. And a reminder to testifiers, you have 3 minutes on the timer, and a chime will notify you when there are 30 seconds left, and then a final chime when time is up.
Thank you. I'm Blake Shell, the Executive and Artistic Director of Oregon Contemporary, and I'm here today on behalf of PACE, Portland Arts and Culture for Equity, which includes a number of organizations advocating for a more equitable approach to arts funding. In the fall of 2024, the newly established Office of Arts and Culture restructured its funding tiers, shifting away from diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility metrics. Instead, funding is now allocated solely based on an organization's budget size. As a result, 45 out of 80 arts organizations saw a reduction in funding, while the largest 5 institutions received an increase. Though even for them, the additional support was far from transformational given their scale. This redistribution has pushed many mid-sized and smaller organizations, particularly those with a strong DEIA focus, to the brink of survival, forcing them to cut programs, lay off staff, or even face potential closure. I urge this committee to take decisive actions in repairing the damage caused by this policy shift, especially in the wake of the broader national attack on DEIA, such as we are seeing under the Trump administration. It's imperative that Portland not lose its commitment to fostering a diverse and inclusive arts ecosystem, rather than allowing systemic inequities to deepen. Increasing funding for large organizations with existing endowments without providing them with truly transformational resources risks having little to no impact on downtown's recovery. If economic revitalization is the goal, we must first ensure that we are not inadvertently stripping vital resources from the other districts, especially from smaller community-driven organizations that actively serve and uplift diverse populations. Second, we must critically assess whether this reallocation of funds is even an effective strategy for improving downtown. A thriving arts and culture sector cannot exist without equity at its core. Any recovery efforts that fail to uphold this principle risk deepening disparities, weakening the very communities that give Portland its creative identity, and ultimately jeopardizing the future of our cultural landscape. As you consider population and economic growth, I'll leave you with the words of an attendee of an event at Oregon Contemporary's Courtyard in North Portland. These nights remind me of what Portland is or can be. I said to my friends, do you want to ride bikes to a park and watch some cool, weird stuff happen? Portland's creative spirit draws people in and keeps them here. People will stay or leave based on whether that spirit endures. Thank you.
Thank you, Blake. Please read the next testifier.
Next, we have Laura Stribe.
Good morning. I'm heartened that the council has my name is Laura Stribe. I am the executive director of an arts and culture nonprofit, Vibe of Portland, and the president of the St. John's Boosters Business Association in North Portland. Good morning. I am heartened that the council has prioritized arts in concert with economic development. I moved to Portland 20 plus years ago because it was an affordable and creative space where I could practice music. As you know, centering the arts has been the through line for Portland's next chapter and is very, very important. You've all heard me talk about that, that the creative economy is so important. I am looking forward to continuing conversations and planning with you and our community partners to highlight just how Portland is already full of our natural resource of creatives. I want to give you some statistics you may have heard me talk about before. We are the 16th most creative city in the US based on a national study, but we are near the bottom in investment. We have over 9,000 musicians and bands that reside here. We have over 600 arts and culture bearing organizations and over 300 music and performing venues, which is more than Austin, who likes to be the music capital of the country. We have over $3.8 billion in revenue statewide for a music industry, with 80% of that coming here in the Portland metro area. With only a third of our culture-bearing organizations providing me data, that we have an over $450 million annual revenue based on those 30% of our cultural organizations. We have over $700 million investment from our film industry over the last 5 years, and that isn't even tapping into our for-profit creative industries. I got to work for the Americans for the Arts Data Project a couple years ago that highlighted how the arts impact our economy. Through an event happening, that trickles out to retail, lodging, transportation, and dining. We see that with the Coraline Cats that were here this summer, highlighted in the economic report that we had more visitors downtown. That was a family-friendly event. It was free. I bought the app. I paid for parking. We bought ice cream. We did a bunch of stuff with the family. That happens on extended business as it ripples out. As this committee and as the city, we need to really work on a vision that centers the arts and creativity as the through line through our economic development. And we need to do that from the big events to the small events. It's a little disappointing that the Portland Film and Events Office this year is not, at least currently on their website, does not have the small community events grants available, which ripples out to all the different neighborhoods. Whereas there is a larger investment of granting for events that have 10,000 people or more. But that can't be every event in Portland. We really need to diversify to the small and the big events. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Laura. Good to see you, and thanks for putting Austin on notice. Hear from our next testifier now.
Our next testifier is Troy Winslow, and Troy is joining us online.
Good morning, councilors. For the record, my name is Troy Winslow. I'm the Development Director for Portland Harbor Community Coalition and member leader of York Collective. While I don't have any data to provide you all today, I do have over 120 years of history in the city. So I'll say this. Simply put, there is no economic recovery if it does not center the future of our children and our climate. Any plan that ignores our current reality is not recovery. It is a short-term illusion at the expense of long-term survival. If our children cannot breathe clean air or drink clean water, if rising temperatures and displacement continue unchecked, if the most vulnerable among us are left behind yet again, then what exactly are we trying to recover? Economic recovery in Portland must be restorative, not extractive. It must acknowledge our real history, not the moderated, comfortable version that evades truth. It requires looking in mirrors and through lenses, tracing issues to their root causes rather than stepping over them. Portland can no longer be an open-air market for affluent profiteers and unprincipled city leaders. Our built environment, transportation systems, and policies shape public health outcomes every day. Traditional market-driven housing has failed low-income and historically marginalized communities, creating cycles of eviction, instability, and homelessness. We desperately need robust investment in supportive housing developments and alternative housing models that create pathways to ownership for historically disadvantaged communities. These are long-term, stable, and affordable solutions that protect communities from displacement. We need minority and women-owned businesses building and placemaking these projects from seed to harvest. Housing is not a commodity. It is a human right, a public health necessity, and the foundation of a thriving city. Without stable, affordable housing, any vision for economic recovery is incomplete and unsustainable. Additionally, it is well known that freeways forced through Black and brown communities have led to generations of displacement and disease. Higher rates of asthma, heart disease, and chronic illness caused by air pollution and environmental neglect. We cannot claim to be recovering while continuing to fund the very systems that have harmed us. Economic recovery and development must include shifting away from car dependency and investing more in a regional and local transportation system, including streetcars, buses, light rail, and heavy rail, to reduce pollution, reconnect communities, and create a healthier, more equitable city. A transit system that prioritizes people over cars is a transit system that prioritizes public health. Finally, I'd be remiss not to emphasize that much of Portland's art, culture, and opportunity would not exist without the unacknowledged contributions of Pullman porters, redcaps, and other Black railroad workers. Without them, there would have been no Golden West Hotel, no Dude Ranch Club, no spaces where Black musicians, travelers, and entrepreneurs found opportunity in a city that tried at every turn to shut them out. The railroad didn't just move goods, it moved people, ideas, and culture. It connected Portland to the rest of the country, and in doing so, carved out space, however imperfect, for Black artistry, resilience, and community. Economic recovery is meaningless without honoring that legacy and learning from it. And with that, I'll yield my 2 seconds. Thank you.
Thank you, Troy. At this time, Didier, can you please read the next item?
We have one more testifier signed up. One last person, Elizabeth Nye. Is Elizabeth here? Elizabeth Nye? That concludes testimony, and then we can go to agenda item 3, discussion on economic recovery and committee priorities.
Thank you. Colleagues, so this last 16 minutes of the meeting, I would invite us to kind of discuss our own individual priorities as duly elected councilors. In terms of, again, I'll issue the same prompt. What does the economic recovery look like to you? But, what priorities do you want to see us develop as we build our agendas as co-chairs? So I'm going to go last because I'm holding the gavel. So, whoever wants to go first, Councilor Smith, are you still in the queue? Okay. Councilor Dunphy.
Yeah, I'll go first. That sounds fine. Well, I previewed some of my comments already, and I've been talking about it nonstop to the point of criticism for the last year. But I think that Portland's next chapter comes through a cultural renaissance, and that our cultural renaissance is going to fuel growth, and that we only achieve community safety with community. I mentioned I was a professional musician in my 20s. I was also a small business owner. I understand. And I'm a homeowner, and I'm now a community member. I'm a father. I've got all of these different amazing lenses to see how people are living in this city and how they choose to live in this city. And we have to make this city a place that can empower that. And I think that we are not going to have a lot of economic dollars to invest in certain types of things, but we can do things a little differently to make it so that we can facilitate those things. Opening a small business is incredibly difficult in the best of circumstances. We're not in the best of circumstances, and there are ways that we can try and make those systems more self-explanatory so that people don't have to worry that they are going to, that the answer is a no until it's a yes when it comes to permitting or other regulations. I think we need a central vision for this city and that builds on the naturally occurring resources that are already here and give people a sense of pride of place. I view Portland, as Laura had mentioned in her public testimony, there's over $3 billion worth of economic activity that happens in Portland in the music industry alone. And that's not just the guy on stage with a guitar. That is we are one of the largest concentrations of instrument makers. We have the second largest digital rights distributor in the world in Portland, CD Baby, out by the airport. Recording studios and all these other things that are opportunities to unify around a common identity. We do have more music venues and more musicians than Austin or Nashville right now. Partially it's because we're so great. It's also partially because their economy is collapsing. Portland is the independent music capital of the world, and I want to use that as a tool to bring people to public spaces, to use it as an excuse to look at our permitting and our regulatory efforts. To that same effort, I want to have conversations about our taxation. I think that right now we need to raise the floor on city business taxes. I think that right now, small entrepreneurs, people who are starting their businesses, Uber drivers are having to pay pretty significant taxes towards our business license taxes towards the city when they're barely struggling to survive and pay rent as it is. We are one of the highest business income taxes and have one of the lowest floors in the country. We cannot solve this in a bubble. We cannot solve this by ourselves. Government cannot solve the problem ourselves. It has to be a partnership. It cannot just be economic investment. It has to be housing. It has to be public space. It has to be those conversations about what we do with downtown. It has to be collaborative. It has to work across government types. And we have to make decisions. It's time to lead. And as Councilor Ryan was saying, the moment has passed. Other previous elected officials and elected bodies have let the moment pass as though this is how things are going to happen. We need to be decisive and we need to lead and show a vision for what comes next. So.
Thank you, Councilor. Let's move now to Councilor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to concentrate my efforts on building a new workforce, a diverse workforce, and trying to figure out how to put these young people on a pathway to success at the City of Portland and other local government, in addition to building a workforce that includes our most vulnerable students in schools like Park Rose, David Douglas, Reynolds, and Centennial. And as I said earlier, I will be coming out with a initiative in a couple of weeks that will be very bold. It will be inclusive, sorry, Mr. President, and it will work with communities that we have left behind. One of my bigger targets will be to improve, expand sidewalks in District 1. I looked at a report a day ago from PBOT, and they need $31 million just to maintain the sidewalks in District 1. We're not talking about the map that showed the majority of the sidewalks that need improved and that need sidewalks are in District 1 and District 4. But that is just a drop in the bucket, and I think we need to make really big investments in putting sidewalks in District 1, which will also put people to work, and it will also train folks in pre-apprenticeship programs to be able to make our part of the city look as good as the rest of the city of Portland. And that's where I'm going to be concentrating on, Mr. President. Mr. Chair.
Thank you for that, Counselor. Let's move now to Counselor Clark, and I will just say that we have 9 minutes left in the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I'm always brief. I actually, when I looked at this report, I thought about big themes and I want to be involved in all those themes. And the first one was really being part of the region. And I heard that comment earlier, is everybody pull in the same direction. I think Councilor Ryan mentioned alignment, partnerships. I think we need to think about where we're present in the region. I think sometimes Portland doesn't show up to things like West Side Economic Alliance or the North Clackamas County Business Alliance, those kinds of things. We need to show up and be present and all pull in the same direction. I think that we also have all the raw material here that we need. We've got the people, the ideas, the beauty, the water. And I think Prosper's leadership on growing our own is really a theme I want to see across all of our different issue areas or policy areas, is grow our own success. I want to turn around our reputation. We've talked about that, making downtown safe and livable, and we have huge, exciting projects on the horizon from the Broadway corridor, James Beard Market, AVT, all kinds of things are going on, but we have to overcome that perception bias before we're going to attract the capital that we need to make other things happen. You also asked about intersecting with other committees. I think clearly the housing affordability issue is a number one, and I think our vice chair is on that committee, I believe you are. Somebody here is on, you're on, sorry. Councilor Dunphy is on that committee. Oh, you are too, sorry, okay. There's a lot of intersection between the Housing Committee and this committee, and I know that Councilor Green and I are very, very interested in affordable housing. And lastly, I'll just say that we need to take the long view here, and probably because I've been around for a long time, I have seen the pendulum swing back and forth and back and forth. You know, in the 80s, 40,000 people left the state. They came back in a gold rush. I mean, the pendulum will continue to swing back and forth. So I'm very optimistic about the future. But as Councilor Smith said, it's going to depend on a lot of our investments, where we put our shoulder to the wheel here. But I'm very excited to work on a variety of these issues in different committees and very much appreciate my colleagues' comments as well.
Thank you, Councilor Clark. And Councilor Co-Chair Ryan.
Hey, thanks, Co-Chair. Yeah, activation. We have decent gains in our night and evening economy, so we need to see that activation start to take off during the daytime. That's been behind. Big picture, you know, our Portland story is we've never been a big company town. We've been a town that attracts, a city that attracts people, that attracts families. So, you know, looking at those indicators of families with kids returning and staying here through the K-12 system, and then they come back and raise and build a life here as well. That's how we've always been. You know, I visioned the mom who gets to the park with her 2 or 3 kids, and when she gets there, the restrooms are actually open and clean. I picture the elder couple on my block that stopped taking Max 6 years ago. And I can't wait for the day that they're comfortable riding it again, and it's clean and it's safe. And then they can officially never drive their cars again, because that's why they moved near the Max. But right now they feel like they can't. So I think that interconnection between downtown and neighborhoods is really important. It's not a us and them. If you think of a body, the downtown's a part. It pumps resources out to the rest of the city. And if you don't bring your downtown back, you don't have as much revenue that will ever get to the rest of the city. I'll end with something that's kind of cheesy but fun. I signed us up for a dragon boat, and I'm still waiting for more people from the city council and the offices to join me. I definitely need help. And we're challenging the mayor's office and the admin, and we're challenging Metro, and we're challenging the county. And I know this might sound odd, but I think for all of us to meet down on the river and paddle in the same direction and see us there at the beginning of June. And hopefully you'll see at least 4 or 5 municipalities with boats having a good time, learning how to build relationship and row in the same direction. Thanks.
Thank you, Co-Chair. I do enjoy a good challenge, so I'll make sure that my office RSVPs to that.
Oh, good.
I'll just bring us home here. So as co-chair of this committee, I see our work as urgent and critical to the success of all the policy work that our committees will take up. And I mentioned that at the very beginning. It's urgent because, as we've seen with the presentation today, we have significant economic challenges that directly impact the fiscal health of our local governments. And it's critical to the other work because without an engine of economic growth, we cannot generate the incomes that themselves generate the revenues that enable the policy agendas that we were all elected to pursue. So my approach to this committee will be to help set a policy agenda that focuses our work on addressing the immediate steps we need to take to stimulate economic growth in the city, kind of turn that ship around, while ensuring that the policies we enact will actually shape the growth in the direction we want to go for all Portlanders, okay? Because we have to take that short run and long run view. The decisions we make today will impact our children. So how do we proceed? I do think that the urban doom loop dynamic was useful for framing the urgency and the criticality of the challenge, but it's, you know, and it's there. It's a looming threat, and we should take it very seriously. But I just want to make myself very clear: we're not in an urban doom loop. There are a lot of green shoots. We've seen voter sentiment improving, right? 62% favorable versus 49% just last year. We've got an increase in downtown foot traffic. We've got space activation. I mean, the Winter Lights Festival recently was a big, huge success. There's an effort to rehabilitate the Paris Theater. We're going to bring a burlesque show here. There's the James Beard Public Market. These are all great things, and they're going to be good boons to our downtown core. And I will note that the net population trend of outflow is reversing. Okay, we're seeing, you know, stabilization there. So I agree with the takeaways of that wrap-up slide that, you know, we should not assume that our economic recovery is going to happen on our own. So let's put our hands on the steering wheel and let's steer it in the direction we want to go for the folks who elected us. So I'll just give you some concrete steps that I intend to focus on and the questions I'll ask to this committee. One, what can we do to lower the hurdles to housing production? That's always the question I will ask in virtually every venue, but this one included. Two, are we making it difficult or joyous to use our public spaces for recreation? It should not be a pain and a chore to volunteer in our communities and put on an event. And finally, are we spending our TIF resources? I know they don't flow for another 5 years, but are we spending our TIF resources in such a way that promotes diversified economic growth while at the same time lowering the cost of housing? Those two are two sides of the same coin for me. So I'll end it with that. We have 2 minutes left. So what I'll say is I'll say thank you to everyone who participated today. Thank you to the council clerk and Christopher for helping us set this up. Our next meeting will be March 11th, same time, same bat channel. And at that, I will adjourn this meeting of the Arts and Economy Committee.